When my sister begged me for $10,000, claiming it was for a dire emergency, I didn't hesitate. She was family, and family helps each other out. But when I found out she'd used the money for a luxury vacation, I confronted her. She smirked and said, "What are you going to do about it?" Little did she know, I had an answer she'd never see coming, one that would make her regret her lies instantly. It was a Thursday evening, and I was halfway through preparing dinner when my phone buzzed on the counter. The name Melanie flashed on the screen, and I hesitated for a moment before answering. My sister wasn't one to call out of the blue unless something was wrong. "Hello," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "I need your help," she blurted out, her voice trembling. "It's an emergency." My heart immediately sped up. Melanie had a knack for being dramatic, but there was something in her tone this time, a genuine edge of panic that made me pause. "What's going on?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. She launched into a frantic explanation. Her bills were piling up, she said, and an unexpected expense had thrown everything into chaos. There were tears in her voice as she described the stress she was under, how she didn't know where else to turn. I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. Melanie had always been a bit of a mess when it came to managing her finances, but this sounded serious. "How much do you need?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, and then she said, $10,000. I nearly dropped the phone. 10,000. I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "I know it's a lot," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "But I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I can. I'm desperate right now." I stared at the wall, my mind racing. $10,000 wasn't a small amount. It was a significant chunk of my savings. But Melanie was my sister. We didn't always get along, but she was family. And family helps each other out, right? "All right," I said after a long pause. "I'll do it." Her relief was palpable. Thank you, thank you," she said, her voice breaking with gratitude. "I promise I won't forget this." That night, I transferred the money into her account. As I clicked the final confirmation button, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that I could help her, but also a nagging sense of unease. I pushed the doubt aside, telling myself I was overthinking it. Over the next few days, Melanie sent me several text messages thanking me profusely. "You saved me," one of them read. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I started to feel like I'd done the right thing, like I'd been a good sister when she needed me most. At the time, I had no idea what she was really up to. And if I had known, I might have thought twice before giving her that money. Life had settled back into its usual rhythm after Melanie's emergency. I didn't hear much from her beyond the occasional text thanking me again for helping her out. She assured me she was working on a plan to repay the money, though she was vague about the details. I told myself not to worry, that I'd done the right thing by supporting her in her time of need. Then, one quiet Saturday morning, everything changed. I was lounging on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through social media while sipping my coffee. My finger paused mid-swipe when a familiar face popped up on my feed, Melanie. She had posted a photo of herself reclining on a lounge chair, a bright blue cocktail in one hand and a pair of oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. Behind her was an impossibly clear turquoise ocean, the kind you see on postcards. The caption read, "Finally living my best life." At first, I was confused. Melanie hadn't mentioned anything about a trip. She was supposed to be dealing with her so-called financial emergency, not jetting off to paradise. I clicked on her profile, and my confusion quickly morphed into something far worse. Her page was filled with photos from the same tropical location. In one, she was posing in front of an infinity pool with a caption that read, "Vacation of my dreams." In another, she was dressed in a flowy sundress, holding a glass of champagne at what appeared to be a luxury resort dinner. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. This couldn't be real. She had cried to me over the phone, begged me for help, told me she was in a dire situation. And now, here she was, flaunting a lavish vacation as if she hadn't just borrowed $10,000 under false pretenses. The more I scrolled, the angrier I became. The timestamps on the photos made it clear that this wasn't some old vacation she was reminiscing about. She was still there, posting in real time. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and betrayal. I had drained a significant chunk of my savings to help her, thinking I was bailing her out of a financial disaster. But instead, she had used the money to fund a luxurious getaway, complete with spa treatments and sunset cruises. It wasn't just the money that stung. It was the fact that she had lied to my face, taken advantage of my trust, and now seemed to be reveling in it. I couldn't believe how easily she had manipulated me, how convincing her performance had been when she called me in tears. As I sat there, staring at the glowing screen, I felt a knot of determination form in my chest. I wasn't going to let this slide. Melanie had crossed a line, and I was going to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions. But first, I needed answers. I didn't wait long to confront Melanie. The anger bubbling inside me couldn't be contained, and I knew that if I didn't address it soon, it would eat away at me. She was back from her emergency trip, posting selfies with captions about how refreshed and rejuvenated she felt. I decided to pay her a visit, determined to get the answers I deserved. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me but quickly plastered on a bright smile. "Hey, what brings you here?" she said, as if we were just having a casual family visit. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, my face betraying none of the fury swirling inside me. "So," I began, crossing my arms, "how was your emergency vacation?" Her smile faltered for a split second before she regained her composure. "Oh, that," she said, laughing nervously. "It was nice. Much needed, honestly." "Nice?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Nice? Melanie, you called me crying, saying you were in financial ruin. I gave you $10,000 because you made it sound like you were about to lose everything. And now I find out you spent it on a luxury vacation?" Her reaction was worse than I could have imagined. Instead of apologizing or even looking remotely guilty, she smirked. "Relax," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I deserved a break. I've been under a lot of stress lately." I stared at her, my jaw practically on the floor. "Stress?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You think stress justifies lying to me and stealing from me? That money was supposed to help you survive, not fund your vacation of a lifetime." She shrugged, completely unfazed. "You've got plenty of money," she said. "You'll be fine. Besides, I needed it more than you did." Her audacity took my breath away. I had expected some level of remorse, maybe even an apology, but this smug, entitled attitude was beyond anything I had anticipated. "You lied to me," I said, my voice shaking. "You looked me in the eye, cried to me, and told me you were in a crisis. I trusted you, Melanie. I thought you were in danger of losing your home or something, and I drained my savings to help you. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She rolled her eyes, as if my words were an overreaction. "Oh, please," she said. "You're acting like I stole your life savings or something. It's just money. You'll make more." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's not just about the money," I shouted, my anger finally spilling over. "It's about the fact that you lied, manipulated me, and used my generosity to fund your selfish whims. And now, instead of apologizing, you're acting like I'm the one overreacting." She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, her smirk growing even wider. "What are you going to do about it?" she said, her tone dripping with mockery. Her words echoed in my head, taunting me. "What are you going to do about it?" In that moment, I realized Melanie had no intention of taking responsibility for her actions. She had convinced herself that I would let it slide, that I would do what I'd always done, give in, forgive, and move on. But not this time. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "You'll find out soon enough," I said, my voice cold and steady. Her smirk faltered slightly, but she quickly covered it up. "Sure, whatever," she said dismissively. "Let me know when you're done being dramatic." I turned and walked out the door, my mind racing. I wasn't about to let her get away with this. She had underestimated me, but she was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone to be taken advantage of. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Melanie's mocking words, "What are you going to do about it?" played on a loop in my head for days. Every time I thought about her smug expression, my blood boiled. She had stolen from me, lied to my face, and then had the audacity to taunt me. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't as powerless as she thought. If she expected me to just roll over and accept her betrayal, she was about to get a very rude awakening. The first step was gathering evidence. I knew that if I wanted to hold her accountable, I needed to be meticulous. I spent hours scrolling through her social media accounts, screenshotting every post she had made about her lavish vacation. The photos alone were incriminating. Cocktails on the beach, luxurious spa treatments, 5-star dinners with captions like, "Treating myself because I deserve it." Next, I dug through our text conversations. The messages where she had begged for the money, claimed she was in dire straits, and promised to pay me back were all there, clear as day. I saved them all, making sure to organize them chronologically to paint the full picture of her deceit. Then, I remembered something that made my heart race. During my visit to confront Melanie, I had noticed a few crumpled receipts in the trash near her kitchen. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now I realized they might be crucial. I returned to her house under the guise of trying to talk things out and casually lingered in the kitchen while she rambled about how I was being unreasonable. While she was distracted, I discreetly fished the receipts out of the trash and tucked them into my bag. Later, when I examined them, my suspicions were confirmed. They included transactions from luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, and a boutique store that specialized in beachwear. The receipts were the final piece of the puzzle. Combined with the social media posts and her texts, I now had a mountain of evidence proving that she had used my money to fund her extravagant vacation. The next step was seeking legal advice. I reached out to my friend Jake, who worked as a lawyer. Jake had always been straightforward and reliable, and I knew he would give me the guidance I needed. When I explained the situation to him, he listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with every detail. "Let me get this straight," he said. "She asked you for $10,000 under the pretense of an emergency, but she used it for a luxury vacation instead?" "That's exactly what happened," I said, showing him the evidence I had gathered. Jake leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his desk. "You have a strong case," he said finally. "This is a clear case of misrepresentation. You gave her the money in good faith, and she used it for something entirely unrelated to what she claimed." Hearing those words filled me with a sense of validation. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I was back in control. Jake explained the options available to me. I could send her a formal demand for repayment, outlining the evidence and giving her a chance to settle the matter privately. If she refused, I could escalate the situation by filing a claim in small claims court. Either way, Melanie would be forced to face the consequences of her actions. With Jake's help, I drafted a detailed demand letter. The letter outlined everything: how Melanie had contacted me under the pretense of a financial emergency, how I had provided the money in good faith, and how she had used it for a personal vacation instead. I attached copies of the evidence I had gathered, including the social media posts, text messages, and receipts. I sent the letter via certified mail, ensuring that she would have to sign for it and couldn't claim she never received it. The waiting period was nerve-wracking, but I knew I was doing the right thing. In the meantime, I mentally prepared myself for whatever her response might be. I knew Melanie well enough to anticipate her reactions: anger, denial, and likely an attempt to guilt me into backing down. But I was ready for her. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about standing up for myself and making it clear that I wouldn't tolerate being taken advantage of. Melanie had underestimated me, but she was about to learn a hard lesson. When you cross certain lines, there are consequences. Once the demand letter was in Melanie's hands, I expected an explosion, and she didn't disappoint. The very next day, my phone rang, her name flashing on the screen like a red flag. I took a deep breath before answering, preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation. "What the hell is this?" she yelled before I could even say hello. "Good morning to you too, Melanie," I said calmly.
"This letter," she snapped.
"You're seriously asking me to pay you back $10,000? What's wrong with you? We're family." Her indignation was so over the top that I almost laughed. "What's wrong with me?" I said, my voice hardening. "What's wrong with you? You lied to me, manipulated me into giving you money, and then spent it on a vacation. Did you really think I'd just let that slide?" She scoffed, her tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, come on. You've got money. You didn't even need that $10,000. Why are you being so dramatic?" Hearing her dismiss my hard-earned savings as if it were pocket change made my blood boil. "That's not the point, Melanie," I said firmly. "This isn't about whether or not I needed the money. It's about the fact that you took advantage of me. You lied and used me, and now you think you can get away with it." Her tone shifted from smug to defensive. "You wouldn't actually take me to court," she said, trying to sound confident but failing to hide the edge of uncertainty in her voice. "We're family. Family doesn't lie to each other or steal from each other," I shot back. "And if you think I won't follow through, you clearly don't know me as well as you think you do." Her response was predictably defiant. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "Do what you want. You're not going to scare me with your little threats." "It's not a threat, Melanie," I said calmly. "It's a promise. You have 2 weeks to either pay me back or work out a repayment plan. If you don't, I'll file a claim in small claims court." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're unbelievable," she said. "All this over a little vacation. I needed a break, okay? Is that such a crime?" I didn't dignify that with a response. 2 weeks, I repeated. "If I don't hear from you by then, I'll see you in court." The line went silent for a moment before she hung up. I sat there for a while, my hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. I hated that it had come to this, but I knew I couldn't back down. If I let her get away with this, it would only reinforce her belief that she could manipulate and exploit me without consequences. The next 2 weeks were a waiting game. I gave her every opportunity to make things right, but as I expected, she didn't take me seriously. Instead, she spent those days bad-mouthing me to anyone who would listen. "She's blowing this way out of proportion," she told our mutual friends. "It's just money. I can't believe she's willing to ruin our relationship over this." I stayed quiet, refusing to engage with the rumors she was spreading. I knew the truth, and I knew that anyone who mattered would see through her excuses. When the 2-week deadline passed without a single word from her, I called my lawyer friend Jake and told him I was ready to proceed. "All right," he said. "We'll file the claim. This should be a straightforward case. Don't worry, you've got this." Filing the claim was easier than I had expected. I gathered all the evidence I had meticulously organized, her texts, the social media posts, the receipts, and submitted it along with the claim. I felt a sense of relief as I handed over the paperwork, knowing that I was taking control of the situation. When Melanie was served with a court notice a few days later, the fallout was immediate. She called me again, this time in a full-blown panic. "You're really doing this?" she shrieked. "I can't believe you're taking me to court." "You had every chance to make this right," I said, my voice steady. "I warned you what would happen and you ignored me. Now, we'll let the court decide." Her tone shifted from anger to desperation.
"Please," she said.
"Can't we work something out? I'll pay you back, I swear." "You had 2 weeks to work something out," I reminded her. "It's too late for that now." For once, she didn't have a snarky comeback. I ended the call, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to go, but Melanie had left me no choice. As the court date approached, I prepared myself for the showdown to come. Melanie might have thought I was bluffing, but she was about to learn the hard way that I meant every word. It didn't take long for the family to get wind of my dispute with Melanie. News of the court filing spread like wildfire, and suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Calls and texts started flooding in, each carrying a different perspective. "I can't believe Melanie did that to you," my cousin Sarah said over the phone, her voice dripping with disapproval. "She's always been selfish, but this is a new low." "You're really taking her to court?" my Aunt Linda asked during a family dinner. "I mean, I get it, but don't you think that's a bit extreme? She's your sister." The reactions were a mixed bag. Some relatives were firmly on my side, appalled by Melanie's blatant disregard for my trust. Others tried to guilt me into dropping the case, insisting that family is family and that I shouldn't let money come between us. "It's just $10,000, Uncle Bob said one evening when he called to offer advice. "You're going to ruin your relationship with your sister over this? Is it really worth it?" What these guilt trips failed to consider was that it wasn't just about the money. Sure, $10,000 was a significant amount, but the issue ran far deeper than finances. It was about accountability, about standing up for myself after years of being the one Melanie leaned on and took advantage of. I had bailed her out more times than I could count. Whether it was covering her rent, lending her money for car repairs, or helping her after one of her countless impulsive decisions, I had always been there. But this time, she had crossed a line. She had lied to my face, taken advantage of my generosity, and then mocked me when I confronted her. I wasn't just fighting for repayment. I was fighting to finally draw a boundary. When Melanie realized I wasn't bluffing, her defiance started to crack. At first, she stuck to her usual tactics, dismissing my actions as overreactions and insisting that I'd calm down eventually. But as the court date loomed closer, her confidence began to waver. One night, just as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a call from her. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I said, my voice neutral. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. I'll pay you back, I swear. Just give me more time." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "Melanie, I gave you 2 weeks to work something out. You ignored me. You didn't take me seriously, and now this is where we are." "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she cried, her voice cracking. "You're really going to humiliate me in court?" In front of everyone. I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay calm. You humiliated yourself, I said evenly. You lied to me, stole from me, and spent the money on a vacation. I warned you what would happen if you didn't take responsibility, and you chose to ignore me. This is on you. Her tone shifted from desperation to anger. You're so petty, she snapped. You're really going to ruin our relationship over something this stupid? You're supposed to be my sister. I am your sister, I said, my voice firm. And I've spent years being the sister who always bails you out, no matter how many times you mess up. But this time, you went too far. I'm done letting you take advantage of me. She was silent for a long moment, and when she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, she said. I thought I could pay you back before it became a big deal. Then why didn't you just tell me the truth in the first place? I asked, my frustration evident. Why lie about it being an emergency? Why not just ask for help with a vacation, if that's what you wanted? I didn't think you'd say yes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words stung. The truth was, she probably wasn't wrong. I might not have agreed to fund a luxury vacation, but I would have considered helping her if she'd been honest. Instead, she had chosen to lie and manipulate, and now we were both paying the price. By the end of the call, it was clear that Melanie was grasping at straws. She begged me to drop the case, promising once again to repay the money in full. But I had heard those promises before, and I wasn't letting her off the hook so easily. This isn't just about the money, I told her. It's about accountability. You need to face the consequences of your actions, and if that means going to court, so be it. She hung up on me, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But I reminded myself that this wasn't my fault. Melanie had made her choices, and now she had to deal with the fallout. The days leading up to the court date were tense. Melanie tried to rally support from family members, spinning the story to make herself look like the victim. But I stood my ground, refusing to let her or anyone else make me feel like the bad guy. When the day finally arrived, I felt a strange mix of nerves and resolve. This wasn't how I wanted things to go, but I knew I was doing the right thing. Melanie had underestimated me, but she was about to learn that I wasn't someone who could be walked all over. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I walked into the small claims courtroom with my head held high, armed with all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. My stomach churned with a mix of nerves and determination, but I knew I had done everything I could to prepare. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Melanie, on the other hand, looked like a shadow of her usual self. Gone was the smug confidence she had wielded during our previous confrontations. Instead, she appeared nervous and uncertain, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape route. For once, it seemed like the weight of her actions was beginning to sink in. The courtroom was small and unassuming, with a kind of no-nonsense atmosphere that made it clear this was a place for facts, not drama. The judge, an older woman with a stern but fair demeanor, called our case to order and invited me to begin. I stood and presented my side of the story, starting from the moment Melanie had called me in tears, begging for help. I recounted how she had claimed to be in a financial crisis, how I had trusted her, and how I had given her $10,000 in good faith. Then I explained how I had discovered the truth, that she had used the money for a lavish vacation, all while flaunting it on social media. To support my claims, I handed over a folder containing the evidence I had compiled, screenshots of her social media posts, copies of her text messages, and receipts from her extravagant trip. I had even printed out a timeline that connected the dates of her vacation to the time she had borrowed the money. The judge examined the documents carefully, nodding occasionally as I spoke. When I finished, she turned to Melanie and asked if she had anything to say in her defense. Melanie stood, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her hands. She stumbled over her words, trying to paint herself as a victim of circumstance. I didn't mean for things to get this far, she said, her voice trembling. I was just, overwhelmed. And I thought I'd be able to pay it back sooner. The judge raised an eyebrow. Overwhelmed enough to book a luxury vacation? She asked, her tone laced with skepticism. Melanie faltered. I needed a break, she stammered. It was a mistake, okay? I didn't think it would turn into such a big deal. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Last name, this isn't about whether or not you think it's a big deal. It's about the fact that you misrepresented the situation to your sister, took a significant amount of money under false pretenses, and then used it irresponsibly. Do you have any substantial defense against these claims? Melanie shook her head, her usual bravado completely stripped away. No, she admitted quietly. The judge didn't take long to deliver her ruling. "It's clear that this money was given under false pretenses," she said, addressing Melanie directly. "Your sister trusted you, and you violated that trust. You are responsible for repaying the full amount of $10,000 plus court fees." Melanie's face crumpled as the verdict was announced. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. After the hearing, Melanie approached me in the hallway, her eyes red and her voice shaky. "Please," she said, her tone desperate. "I know I messed up, but can't we work something out? I don't know how I'm going to come up with that money." I stared at her, my emotions a mix of anger and exhaustion. "You brought this on yourself, Melanie," I said simply. "You had every chance to make things right before it got to this point. Now, you'll have to figure it out." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in silence. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure. The court's decision validated everything I had gone through, and while it didn't erase the betrayal, it gave me the justice I had been seeking. As I drove home, I reflected on the journey that had led me to this point. It hadn't been easy to stand up to Melanie, especially with the pressure from family to let it go. But I knew I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been taken advantage of by someone they trusted. This chapter of my life was finally coming to a close, and I was ready to move forward. The court's decision left Melanie with no room to maneuver. The judge had set a strict repayment schedule, outlining monthly payments that would chip away at the $10,000 she owed me. Failure to comply would result in additional legal consequences, and the severity of the judgment finally seemed to sink in. The first payment arrived on time, a modest sum compared to the total debt, but it was a start. I had set up a separate account to keep track of the repayments, knowing that this process would take months, if not years. While it didn't feel satisfying in the way I had imagined, it was still a tangible reminder that Melanie was finally being held accountable. Her lifestyle, however, took an immediate hit. Gone were the days of impulsive luxury. She canceled her gym membership at an upscale studio, sold her designer handbags, and traded in her sleek SUV for a reliable but unremarkable compact car. Social media, once a platform for flaunting her extravagant escapades, became eerily quiet. At first, Melanie was seething. "You've ruined my life," she spat during one of her early payments. "I hope you're happy." I remained calm, refusing to engage with her attempts to make me the villain. "You did this to yourself, Melanie," I replied evenly. "All I'm asking is for you to pay back what you owe." Her fury didn't last long. Reality set in as she adjusted to her downsized life. Without the disposable income she'd once spent so recklessly, she was forced to make sacrifices. Her once frequent weekend getaways were replaced with quiet nights at home, and her wardrobe went from high-end designer to practical basics. For months, her resentment simmered just below the surface, evident in the clipped tone of her texts and the icy looks she gave me during family gatherings. But as the repayments continued and the weight of her choices became undeniable, I started to notice subtle shifts in her behavior. One evening, several months into the repayment process, Melanie showed up at my doorstep unannounced. She looked different, less polished, more subdued. There was no trace of the smugness or entitlement that had defined her demeanor during our earlier encounters. "I just wanted to drop this off," she said, holding out an envelope containing her latest payment. "Thanks," I said, taking it from her. I was about to close the door when she hesitated, her expression conflicted. "Wait," she said, her voice soft. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, she stared at the floor, seemingly gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she began, her voice shaky. "About everything I did and how I handled it." I stayed silent, giving her the space to continue. "I was wrong," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "I shouldn't have lied to you. I shouldn't have used you the way I did. You were trying to help me, and I took advantage of that. I'm sorry." Her apology caught me off guard. It wasn't the grand gesture I had once imagined, but it felt sincere. Melanie wasn't the type to admit fault easily, so hearing her take responsibility was a moment I hadn't expected. "Thank you," I said after a pause. "I appreciate you saying that." She nodded, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. "I've learned a lot these past few months," she said. "About myself, about how I've treated people. I don't want to be that person anymore." It wasn't a complete transformation. Melanie still had a long way to go, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the sister I had once been close to, the one I had always hoped she could be again. As she left that evening, I felt a strange sense of closure. The repayment process was far from over, but her apology was a sign that something had shifted. It didn't erase the hurt or undo the betrayal, but it was a beginning. Melanie was finally starting to take responsibility for her actions, and that meant more than I had expected. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like there was hope for us, and for the future. As the months turned into years, the situation with Melanie slowly shifted from an open wound to a scar, a reminder of the pain, but also of the strength I found in standing up for myself. The experience had been exhausting and at times heartbreaking, but it taught me lessons I would carry for the rest of my life. For as long as I could remember, I had believed that helping family meant unconditional support, no matter the circumstances. I thought being a good sister meant bailing Melanie out of every mess she created, even when it came at a cost to myself. But this ordeal forced me to confront the truth. There's a fine line between helping someone and enabling them. Helping is about support, about giving someone the tools they need to improve their situation. Enabling, on the other hand, is about shielding someone from the consequences of their actions, allowing them to repeat the same mistakes without accountability. For years, I had blurred those lines, but Melanie's betrayal made it clear that it was time to set boundaries. As the repayment process continued, Melanie slowly began to change. At first, it was out of necessity. She had no choice but to adjust to her new financial reality. But over time, the forced discipline seemed to spark something deeper. She started looking for ways to cut costs, taking on extra work to meet her monthly payments. She even attended a few financial literacy workshops, something I never would have expected from the Melanie who once dismissed budgets as boring and restrictive. By the time she made her final payment, she was a different person. The entitlement and arrogance that had once defined her were gone, replaced by a quiet determination. She still wasn't perfect, who is? But she was finally taking responsibility for her life in a way she never had before. The day she handed me her last payment, she smiled faintly and said, "I never thought I'd see the day this debt was gone. It feels good." "It should," I said, returning her smile. "You earned it." Her expression turned serious. "I'm sorry for everything I put you through," she said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope we can move past this someday." Her apology felt genuine, and for the first time, I believed that she was truly remorseful.
"We already have," I said.
"This doesn't erase the past, but it doesn't have to define our future either." The resolution wasn't what I had imagined when this ordeal began. There were no dramatic reconciliations or tearful reunions, but there was something better: growth. Melanie had learned from her mistakes, and I had learned to value my own boundaries. Our relationship wasn't perfect, it never had been, but it was mending. Slowly, we started to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. She no longer saw me as a safety net, and I no longer saw her as a lost cause. Looking back, I realized that the person I had been at the start of this journey wouldn't have been able to handle it. I had grown too, learning to say no, to stand my ground, and to prioritize my own well-being. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of balance in my relationships, not just with Melanie but with everyone in my life. This wasn't the resolution I had expected, but it was one I could live with. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for me, that was enough. A year after Melanie made her final repayment, life had settled into a new normal. The whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and legal battles was behind us, replaced by a quieter, more reflective chapter. Melanie and I still weren't as close as we had once been, but something had shifted between us, a sense of mutual respect that hadn't existed before. One afternoon, she invited me over for coffee. I hesitated for a moment before agreeing, unsure of what to expect. When I arrived, I was surprised to find her apartment looking more modest and organized than I'd ever seen it. Gone were the flashy decorations and the latest gadgets. Instead, the space felt lived in and practical. We sat at her small kitchen table, sipping coffee and reminiscing about our childhood. For the first time in years, we laughed together, not forced or awkward, but genuinely. "Remember the time we tried to bake cookies for Mom's birthday and set off the fire alarm?" she said, her eyes crinkling with amusement. "I'll never forget the look on her face when she came home to find us covered in flour," I said, chuckling. For a moment, it felt like we were kids again, before life and responsibility had complicated everything. Later that evening, as I was tucking Ben into bed, he looked at me with a curious expression. "Mom," he said, his small voice breaking the silence, Why do you still talk to Aunt Melanie? I thought she did something bad. I paused, caught off guard by the question. Ben had overheard parts of the drama between Melanie and me, though I'd done my best to shield him from the details. She did make a mistake, I said carefully. But she realized she was wrong, and she worked hard to make it right. Sometimes, people mess up. But if they're willing to learn and grow, they deserve a second chance. Ben seemed to think about this for a moment before nodding. So, you forgave her? Yes, I said with a smile. I forgave her. And I'm glad I did. The past would always be part of our story, but it no longer defined us. Melanie had grown in ways I hadn't thought possible, and I had learned to value myself enough to set boundaries. Moving forward, our relationship wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing to grow despite it. We both carried scars from the experience, but they were reminders of how far we'd come. As I sat on the couch that night, reflecting on everything, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt like we were both finally moving forward, not just as individuals but as family. That was enough.